We are now going to be having a virtual presentation by a couple of guys from Ohio. I met them last summer when I was in Boston at the national conference, and they are a lot of fun and entertaining and full of energy, and I just thought they were really, really top quality. The first one is Cory Brown, and he has an MPA from Ohio University and a bachelor's degree from Ohio State University. He is a certified prevention consultant in Ohio. He is currently the manager of the Problem Gambling Services for Ohio Casino Control Commission. That's a lot to put on a business card. In the past, Cory has worked as Problem Gambling Network of Ohio, and he has worked in Ohio Coaching and Mentoring Network. He is a published author and a national presenter. Co-presenter today will be Michael Buzzelli. He is currently the Associate Director of Problem Gambling Network of Ohio, and previously he has also worked as a gambling prevention specialist. He has a master's from Case Western University and a master's from Kent State University. He also contracts with 10 or so colleges to provide programming on problem gambling and mental health on college campuses. He too is a published author and a national presenter. Mike and Cory, welcome to our group here in Kentucky.
We are here virtually from Ohio. Thank you so much to Ronslyn and Mike for inviting us to speak with you all today. Of course, Cory and I would love to be there in person, but through many other things happening during Problem Gambling Awareness Month, which we are in here in March 2023, there's a lot going on, but we really look forward to some future collaborations and coming down to visit Kentucky and speaking with you folks in person, because that's absolutely where we'd rather be, to engage in some really good discussion, both in these sessions and outside of the sessions, to network and hear a little bit more about what you're all doing. So Cory and I are here today, and I'm going to let him give himself one more brief introduction before we get into our first portion of the session about building a treatment network. But again, I just wanted to say thanks for having me. And I know some of you, I've met some of you in the fall. Some folks were up at the Indiana conference in Indianapolis, or in Carmel, right outside of Indianapolis. So really happy to be here and look forward to sharing some treatment efforts to building a workforce through collaboration, and then a little bit more later in this morning about some prevention efforts. So I'm just going to let Cory say hi and we'll get going.
Good morning, everyone. Again, I echo Mike's sentiments that definitely wish we could be there in person. My name is Cory Brown. I am the manager of Problem Gambling Services with the Ohio Casino Control Commission. Previously, as Ronslyn had alluded to, I did serve as the Workforce Development Program Manager at Problem Gambling Network of Ohio. My background is in substance use prevention, and that is what we're going to really touch on in the second session. So I'll provide a little bit more context into my background in the second session, but happy to be here, and I'll throw it back over to Mike.
And let me get our sharing going, and we will be up and running. And let me swap my displays. Thank you very much, everybody, for bearing with us during that transition. Here we are. So a very brief introduction. Cory and I have both worked collaboratively when we were coworkers at Problem Gambling Network of Ohio, and we both really had a passion for developing a gambling treatment network and building individuals not only knowledge of gambling disorder treatment, but also their expertise, because there are a lot of nuances when it comes to clinical treatment of gambling addiction. And then that collaboration, if you will, has continued as we are colleagues with me still at Problem Gambling Network of Ohio, and Cory over at Ohio Casino Control Commission. So our objectives today are to really understand the stages of workforce development and how it relates to problem gambling treatment services. We're going to describe some key stakeholders from different sectors of the gambling support service system and really try to understand that importance of having everyone engaged, because this might be a little bit of outside the box thinking of who you can collaborate with in terms of industry partners inside of operation and regulation, obviously thinking about community boards and other agency providers, but then really what are some other sectors we can tap into to get folks and professionals and communities interested in this topic at hand, and then really discuss those opportunities for further training, engagement, and then what's most important is that ongoing participation and sustainability to really build and broaden this treatment workforce. And I think the overarching goal for today is to discuss how we promote and strengthen workforce development collaborations. So we're going to talk about that as the general idea, and then delve into some examples of how we can promote and strengthen collaborations within boards and agency providers throughout the continuum of care, with industry partners, again, meaning operation and regulation, and then also with other community partners. And please feel free, I know that there are some folks viewing virtually as well, that they can chat in, and we'll have some questions in between these sessions from the folks that are live. So you're going to see a couple slides that have this kind of shaded green color. I wanted to highlight these because these are going to be examples of slides that you'll see in actual trainings in Ohio. So inside of our stages training series that we'll discuss, I've pulled some out to show you how we utilize different techniques, and those are shaded in green to let you know that these are real slides from real trainings and not like the white ones for this training. So let's get started in talking about collaborations and building a treatment workforce. You've probably heard a lot about just kind of gambling 101 in other trainings and this morning at this conference, but we really have a large normalization of gambling going on right now. This is across the country, but of course, what we are seeing here in Ohio, we are seeing dramatic increases in what I and others in the field call the 3 A's. So increases in availability, accessibility, and acceptability. So when we increase availability, we're simply talking about making new forms available. So legalizing formally, not legalized or not operational forms of gambling. So in Ohio, for example, and again, throughout the country, we are seeing a rapid legalization of sports betting. And also inside of that is just the expansion of multiple forms. So not only are states who maybe they just had lottery or they just had casinos, many states now have multiple forms and ways to engage. So horse racing, lottery products, casinos, I said horse racing, but dog and horse tracks, but then also now sports betting and other types of fantasy sports and skilled gaming. So there's really something for everyone. And I think that's where the industry wants to go, right? Is they want to move away from really targeting just people who are interested in gambling and targeting everyone, trying to make something available and fun and easy to understand so everyone can have some form of gambling that they enjoy and become involved with. When we increase accessibility, that's when we're making these available forms even easier to use. So 2 examples, a physical example would be, taking sports betting mobile. So you have your DraftKings apps and your FanDuel apps, right? So it sounds cliche, but it's literally at your fingertips. It's more accessible than it used to be. Another example, sometimes people, don't think about is something that happened here a couple of years ago in Ohio. For 4 decades, you could only purchase lottery products with cash. Well, a handful of years ago, that changed to debit and credit cards. So that is more accessible, right? Maybe not everybody always carries cash on them, but they always have their cards with them. That's making the purchase and play of lottery products more accessible. It's not a new form, but it's a new and easier way of playing. Then taking it back to sports betting in game, right? I don't have to wait 4 hours for the Kentucky versus Kansas basketball game to end. I can bet in game on every quarter how many points will be scored, how many free throws will be awarded, how many rebounds the center will get, right? So in game, what we also call live or micro betting is making that form more accessible and more rapid. And then lastly is the acceptability. So gambling is becoming much more normalized, right? It's done at family occasions, birthdays, graduations, weddings. The community does it at fairs and church festivals and things like this. And then we're making it even more normalized and popular through all of the marketing and promotion we see, right? So you can't go, at least again in Ohio, you can't go 2 minutes without seeing a sports betting commercial. And they're constant and they're promoted in a number of different strategies and ways, again, to get everybody involved, not just the sports bettor, anyone we want to draw in. That's males, females, young, old. We want everybody involved. So we're really seeing an increase in acceptability around what is a risk behavior. And problem gambling, we don't measure a gambling problem in how often someone bets or how much they bet. So time or frequency, right? Or amount. So if I gamble $600 every day, that means I have a problem. Or if I gamble 5 out of 7 days, that means I have a problem. It's not based on time or amount spent. We really look at it as the consequences and the impacts from the behavior, right? So are we seeing impacts to our health in a number of different areas? Are we seeing impacts or consequences to our responsibilities, such as education, employment, and of course, the big one that people are always looking at is finances? And are we seeing consequences to our relationships, our family and friends? A lot of times we talk about trust. A lot of times individuals in gambling recovery will mention the reputation is one of the hardest things to repair, right? So are we seeing consequences to our relationships? And when we look at the expanding field of gambling, there's so much here, right? These bubbles are really showing how much bigger this is than what it used to be. So gambling in and of itself is a large field, and there's a lot happening, and there's a lot going on. If you've ever walked inside of a casino, if you've ever had the opportunity to pull the curtain back and really see the operations of it, there's a lot there. And then in our behavioral health field, we have things like responsible gambling, and that is a whole, right? Cory has a job because that's a whole thing, right? That Cory, right? That's his job, and that's just 2 little letters in this big bubble graph or whatever you would call this. And there's problem gambling, right? And that's where I'm at. And then there's gambling disorder. So those of you who are treating, that's kind of your realm, right? But then we have to know about co-occurrence, right? Alcohol and other drugs. We have to know about mental health. There's a lot of depression, a lot of trauma. There's a lot of lethality involved in gambling disorder. These are things we need to know about. And then you have the expansions of sports betting, cryptocurrency, daily fantasy sports, non-fungible tokens. You're starting to get into things like the stock market. You're starting to see things like gambling or gambling, people say, because there's gambling components inside video games. There's a lot here, and we can't possibly be expected to, I guess, stay up to date with it all and be experts in all of it, which is really why we need this focus of collaboration and being able to work together and share each other's expertise, because there's so much going on right now. So what is collaboration? And I'll wait 1 second to see if anybody chats in. I don't know if we want to go back and forth with the mic here, but oftentimes we think about collaboration as common goals, right? Sharing common goals, utilizing each other's strengths and experiences, each other's expertise, each other's network, right? That's collaboration. I met Mike at the Indiana Council, right? We, that was sharing a network, a common network to then get us here today. But oftentimes we miss that last piece of the pie, which is connection, right? We can collaborate without having that personal touch. But oftentimes, and it won't be maybe as successful or as impactful as we wanted it to be. When we can connect and kind of humanize all of the people that are involved, and really empower each other to do better work and to work harder and better together, that's when we can really have successful collaborations. So making those steps to growing and developing a treatment workforce for gambling disorder really starts with these types of collaborations to get buy-in and to empower people to get involved in a field that has, we'll be honest, right, been behind that of mental health and alcohol and other drug addictions. I'm going to turn it over to Cory to mention a little bit about recruitment of practicing clinicians, about boards, and how you kind of start getting that first step into building some interest.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mike. So in Ohio, we have 88 counties, and those 88 counties are served by 50 community alcohol, drug abuse, mental health services boards. So funding rolls down from the federal government to state government, and then that on a per capita formula rolls down to these 50 boards that support our 88 counties. So we have a number of standalone boards, and then we also have boards that are multi-county boards. And so we thought that engaging these boards would be one way to engage their providers. So relationship building was just a real big piece of it. So first, we also developed some surveys for practicing clinicians. We have two main licensing boards in the state of Ohio. One is the Ohio Chemical Dependency Professionals Board, and the other is the Social Work, Marriage, Family Therapist Counselor Board. And so we attempted to do some individual communication to those folks through surveys, just to see about their knowledge of of gambling treatment services, if they provide gambling treatment services. We also tried to see if they had the either the credentials to be able to provide the services, or the competency within their scope of practice to be able to provide the services. That was some of the surveys that we were doing to inform our approach and further communicating with them and building that relationship. We did some mailings and some e-blasts and newsletters. Again, just some pretty consistent communication, just to try to encourage more individuals to get involved in the work. Also, engaging with the boards, and then later and also engaging with the providers. So the Ohio Chemical Dependency Professionals Board is one that has been one of the best to deal with from our standpoint, because we have an endorsement through that board. One of few states, I suppose, that do have a state level endorsement. So it's similar to what I would say the IGCCB has. Similar requirements for getting the ability to provide treatment services for individuals who are experiencing gambling related harms. But we have the ability to enact that on a state level. So a little bit less cumbersome, I suppose, than maybe the international credential, a little bit more accessible for individuals who are only providing treatment services in Ohio, and it might only be a slice of what they do as far as providing services. So engaging in that board, they have, through PGNO, Problem Gambling Network of Ohio, when I was there, they were great to deal with, and we were able to have them put information on the website for individuals who are looking to get that credential, essentially reach out to PGNO for training, for consultation, technical assistance, and all of those things. Provider engagement was something else that we also did. So really reaching out to individual providers who are supported by the boards through state funding. So 2% of the casino tax revenue in Ohio goes to the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, and then that funnels down to the 50 ADAM boards. Again, we're very blessed. I remember speaking to Ronselin at the conference to say, we have $6 million yearly that go to support problem gambling prevention and treatment services. And she looked at me and said, yeah, we have zero. And so I do want to, at least acknowledge that in Ohio, we do have a lot of blessings from us to be able to build these programs. But yeah, we put out a lot of information to providers as well, including consultation on building programs for individuals, both prevention and treatment programs, but also some allocation guidance as well. So we have a lot of individuals who, boards and providers who were spending funds just kind of willy-nilly, didn't know how to spend the money. And so we were providing guidance for those individuals and how to properly spend those funds. So yeah, recruitment has been a big piece in getting individuals bought in to understanding that gambling is a serious issue in Ohio and one that definitely deserves recognition and attention.
Thank you, Cory. Well said. And then, so Cory mentioned the number of counties and how some of that funding works. And here's a quick map here. You can see that, yeah, we've got some nice coverage of providers who are able to provide treatment services for gambling disorder, but you can see some pretty big gaps in there as well. And the majority of the state that does have services has one provider, right? Those yellows. And you start to get into some darker greens, which are larger ones. And then of course, Cuyahoga County, which is where Cleveland is, has 8 providers. And what we're seeing in terms of individuals seeking help is that Cleveland by far every month has more calls to the problem gambling helpline than not only our bigger cities, not only our other big cities, but actually combined. So Cleveland has about as many calls as if you combine Toledo, Columbus, and Cincinnati. So rightfully so, there probably should be some more providers in Cleveland, but people need more than one option, right? And also look at all the white counties that have 0 providers. So this really brings us to why we need to continue to develop more clinicians with these endorsements who can see individuals with gambling disorder. And then it also lends itself to other options like telehealth and things like that as well. And Cory mentioned the GAM endorsement. This could be a training in and of itself, but what you're seeing is those requirements or the path that an individual can take to get their gambling endorsement. And quickly, what it is 30 hours of specific gambling education hours, 100 hours of clinical contact, and that can be doing screens, talking about gambling if maybe you're running an IOP group or some other type of group, rescreening in those groups, clinical assessments, and then of course, individual therapy. And amongst those 100 hours is 4 hours of supervision. We also provide this at PGNO, and then someone can get their renewable GAM, which is attached to their chemical dependency licensure. So anytime every 2 years when they renew whatever licensure they have, that GAM renews as well with 6 hours over those 2 years. You can see the stages that sometimes we mention this, and I've mentioned it already, those stage 1, 2, and 3, those are those 30 hours. So stage 1 is 12. And it's kind of a broad overview of what gambling disorder is. Stage 2 is those specific applications and approaches, treatment modalities, looking at motivational interviewing, other things like this. And then stage 3 is what we believe are really some of those nuances to gambling addiction treatment, working with the families, but also more finance, looking at budgeting, looking at maybe even harm reduction, those types of things get discussed. And that's 6 hours. So for a total of 30. And we just looked at this morning, our new numbers are in. Ohio now has 61 individuals who have a chemical dependency licensure that also have a GAM. So we have 61 practicing clinicians who we believe truly have a firm understanding and experience in treating gambling disorder. And kudos to Cory for his time at PGNO, but also his continued ambassadorship of the GAM at OCCPSA, and then my colleague Claire, our colleague Claire, my coworker Claire, who's doing this work as well, because just 2 or 3 years ago, that number was more like 24, 25. So we've really boosted that number in the past couple of years. Looking further at credentialing, we talked about the GAM for the chemical dependency folks, and then also claiming competency inside of your scope of practice if you're a social worker. That next step is that international certification, which is the ICGC, Internationally Certified Gambling Clinician, or the IGDC, which is International Gambling or Gaming Disorder Certification. So there's two, one for gaming and one for gambling. And then that next step up is the board accredited clinical consultant. So while we really focus on the GAM here in Ohio, because we do have a state specific credential, we do still promote these other levels as well, because some folks do want to attain those. And maybe it's for states that don't have the GAM, that is the first step, right? So we want to make sure that everyone's getting that information as well. So that, I think that was that first step of working with, and how do you start to work with, how do you create some buy-in at that broader level of the boards, the counties, and the agencies. But the continuum of care is a huge collaboration as well. I'm going to quote my friend and co-presenter here, who, when we were just chit-chatting casually, because even when we're just hanging out, we often get onto the gambling services system. We might start talking about soccer or cooking food, but somehow it always goes back to work. And we were talking about what we do in Ohio and the trainings we put on. And we mentioned how, it is a goal of ours to touch on the whole continuum of care inside of any training. And he said it has to be super specific to not touch on the full continuum. And I believe that, because you have to have a really, really specific treatment training to not mention prevention or recovery, or maybe what's going on inside of operation and regulation. So we really want to make certain that all these aspects are getting touched on, and we're kind of breaking down the silos and collaborating together. So how have we done that here? The stages, again, which we talked about very briefly, we've added right here, this third bullet of prevention stage 2. For many, many years, we just had stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3, which were all very clinically focused. But Ohio and other states are doing a lot of prevention work. So we added, what we did is we put treatment in front of our treatment stage 2, and we added a 12-hour prevention stage 2, strategies in preventing problem gambling. If we're putting so much effort and so many funds into the approaches to treat problem gambling, why aren't we also training professionals on how to prevent it, right? So Claire does that training, goes over CSAP strategies, strategic prevention framework. She sees who is registered for the training, and actually finds their board and local data to bring to the training. So when they get into breakout groups, they can look at that. So it's not kind of general information. It's, I'm learning how to look at what's going on in my communities and how I can start to do some of this work. So integrating in those trainings is really important. Going down kind of to the consulting side, endorsement and competency support. So making sure that when we're training individuals, it's not just giving them the CEUs and saying, good luck, we hope you get your GAM. We have information, we have trainings, we have webinars on supporting individuals who are getting that endorsement. So how do you go through the paperwork? You need a supervisor. How do you go about finding a supervisor who can ethically supervise you? Because they also have to have a GAM as well, right? Or an ICGC or something higher. So providing that support and making it easier and more accessible for the treatment professionals who are going through that process. Case presentations is something we do to align with our trainings. They're shorter, a little bit more accessible. We always host them noon to 1, right in the middle of the day, so maybe people can catch them during lunch. But we've integrated these as well. For many years, they were always clinically focused. What we decided to do is remain with a 45-minute clinical case of gambling disorder. So a gambling clinician discussing what they're doing, right, with their clients, going through the screening process, what the client presented with, their form, any comorbidities or co-occurrence, just really taking us through that clinical process. But what we've done is we've added a prevention component to that. So let's say the case is revolving someone who is a sports bettor. We put in information around sports betting and its legalization and what we're seeing its impacts be. We have a really interesting one coming up around the client has co-occurring hoarding, right? So we're having someone who knows more about that come in and do 30 minutes on that specific ailment and how it correlates with problem gambling. So we're trying to really tie these in to bring it a little bit more holistic, and there's a little bit something more for everybody. Clinical supervision and consultation, again, we can't just stop at training, right? So we provide that supervision. We work with Mike Rosen, who's in the Cincinnati area, and Dr. Heather Chapman, who's at the Cleveland VA, to provide those necessary hours of supervision to individuals getting their gambling endorsement. And then, as Cory mentioned briefly, the service consultation is working with boards or agencies on how best to utilize their gambling allocations, because again, there's been a lack of guidance as to how those funds should be utilized, can be utilized. You know, we've talked to boards who say, you know, we want to get involved, but you know, our clinicians just can't spend the money to go to trainings to get trained up. And the response is, use your allocation. You know, Ohio MOS gives you gambling allocation. Workforce development is part of that. You can spend those funds to get your clinicians trained to start treating, right? So really trying to provide more direction and guidance in what is available and how it can be used. This is from one of our clinicians, and I just really like this quote. This is a long time practicing gambling addiction counselor who kind of got handed the role of overseeing prevention at his agency. And he said, I used to think prevention and treatment were like my right hand and my left hand. Then I started overseeing prevention services and realized prevention and treatment are like my right hand and your left foot, right? Meaning these things are a little bit different. And I really need to learn more about prevention services so I can be involved and manage them appropriately. And here is that gentleman. And I'm going to play just a minute of this video.
My name's Steve Capella. I'm manager of gambling treatment and prevention at the Zeph Center in Lucas County. And when we talk about screening at the front door, I'd like to explain how we came to the processes that we use here at the Zeph Center. Many years ago, our primary screening for a gambling disorder was in our initial assessments, and we would do hundreds and hundreds of assessments at the front door, including gambling screenings, and would come up with virtually no problem gamblers. And it took us a while to realize what was going on.
So I just wanted to share that because this is something we utilize in our trainings to break them up a little bit, but also what Steve goes on to say is he does a really good job of discussing re-screening in groups. It's really hard for someone who, you know, maybe they're court ordered for alcohol, or maybe they're there for their mental health. That's what they want to focus on, right? That's what brought them in. If you hand them a gambling screen right then and there, they're very not likely to also identify as someone with a problem with gambling, right? But if you do that screening again later on in treatment, maybe after they've received some education in groups around co-occurring with problem gambling, they might be more likely to identify that one, they gamble, but two, they are receiving consequences from it. So we want to always, again, utilize our experts and collaborate. So that message comes off a lot stronger to clinicians in our trainings if they're hearing it from someone who's actually done it, as opposed to me just, you know, repeating it or spitting it back out at them. So this is a great way to utilize the experts in your state and share some collaboration. And then going on to some little bit more professional development is the fellowship program. So I'm going to turn it back over to Cory for a few minutes to get him back involved, because at his time at PG&O, he oversaw the fellowship program.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so the fellowship started first in 2015. And the first iteration of the fellowship was overseen by Dr. Heather Chapman from the Cleveland VA. And I think it really started just really for the purpose of trying to increase the number of individuals who could supervise those who were providing gambling treatment services in the state of Ohio, but it certainly morphed into something else. And so, you know, when the first iteration happened, it quickly realized that we had a lot of counselors in the state of Ohio who weren't quite prepared to even provide gambling treatment services, let alone supervise an individual who was providing gambling treatment services. So really, the program kind of expanded. It's you know, from being a supervision-based program to then going on to really looking more at competencies, you know, those basic competencies for providing gambling treatment services. There's been up to this point, I think, 8 classes of the fellowship, and it has you know, it's gone through many transitions. So, you know, the pandemic obviously had an impact on some of the ways that the fellowship was organized. We did go virtual, and I think it is majority virtual even to this day. However, we did start focusing more on project-based approach as opposed to looking at like a case presentation and individual consultation. So it's went through a lot of different iterations, but really the purpose is to build more experts in gambling treatment in the state of Ohio. So not just those basic competencies, but provide them with experts and provide them with skills and professional development opportunities to then become trainers themselves, become fellowship facilitators. So a graduate from the 2015, the first class of the fellowship program, is now, you know, the facilitator for the fellowship program, Mike Rosen, as Mike Buzzelli had stated. So the purpose of a lot of the programs that we operate in Ohio are to not just build those clinical skills, but also to build professional development, to make things really cyclical. So an individual starts in training, you know, they move to supervision consultation, they get some more retraining, they enter a program of professional development like the fellowship, and then they start providing training to, you know, individuals who might be new to the gambling support service system in Ohio. So that's just a brief, quick overview of the fellowship program. Yeah, definitely want to get into some of these advanced fellowship projects. So 2 years ago, we saw another need. So individuals, you know, we had up to that point 7 classes of the fellowship program, and those 7 classes had individuals who still wanted more. They were still looking at, you know, what else can we have another fellowship? We want to be involved in a program like this again. So we had an advanced fellowship for individuals who had already graduated the fellowship program previously to then engage again. And so again, it was a project-based fellowship overseen by Dr. Heather Chapman, had a variety of different individuals with different roles inside of you know, their individual agency. So we had a clinical director, we had an individual who worked in a corrections facility, we had an individual who is from the prevention world, which we'll get way more into here in a bit, and we also had a clinician and a CEO, and also very wide array of projects. You know, we wanted to look at providing support for new counselors. We wanted to look at pet-assisted wellness services, which was something that was very foreign to me at the time. And that has now taken off at Zeph Center to where they're now providing pet-assisted wellness services in both prevention and treatment. The incarcerated population was something that has a very large need in Ohio, and something that has been overlooked for a period of time. And so, you know, looking at how to embed services inside of corrections facilities was also something that was seen. And then, you know, a clinical director really looked at adverse childhood experiences and has been presenting on this now for the last few years at different conferences and case presentations and those things. So again, we've seen all of these things actually come to fruition in the state of Ohio. So it's been a really amazing program.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that you're hitting the nail on the head there is that integration, that again, you know, adapting a clinically focused program to allow for other professionals, again, the prevention coordinator and the clinical director, right? The clinical director was a clinician, but not practicing at that time there, right? So trying to figure out ways to get more folks involved, because then these all become, again, ambassadors to their agencies and to their counties for this type of work. Lastly is the full system integration. So again, we spent a lot of time training individual clinicians, building the professional expertise and experience of individual clinicians. We said we got to then do better at the full agency structure, because you can have a great you could have a 10 team of graduated fellows who are gambling addiction treatment experts. If we're not screening, right, we're not going to get people to them anyway. So it doesn't matter, right? We need full system integration of everybody doing their part, everybody being bought in on the systems that are in place to provide services for gambling disorder. So we are working with agencies across the state throughout their service structure. So working with the intake and assessment team, working with prevention and promotion to make sure the word is out in the community that they're promoting that they have these services, using proper messaging, not using triggering images or stigmatizing language. So that's what we do with the marketing and communication teams at these agencies. Of course, workforce development for the treatment teams, working with peer recovery support, if that is available at the agency, which is another growing interest and priority here in Ohio. And then leadership as well, because it starts at the top, right? If you don't have the buy-in, if you don't have the systems in place and the culture to support the growth of gambling services at the agency, they're not going to take off. And that is something we had seen in Ohio as well. So really trying to work on leadership buy-in so all of these other systems are a well-oiled machine. And that takes us to warm transfer. And I think all of the culmination here, again, building this workforce, breaking down the silos, working through the continuum of care so everybody's involved, takes us to, this is kind of like the final step of where we are now, training, professional development with the fellowship. And now we have this warm transfer line, which is an extension of the Ohio Problem Gambling Helpline. So individuals call the Ohio Problem Gambling Helpline and they are given resources in their locality. But really that's what it is, right? It is a helpline. Now that helpline operator will say, would you like me to connect you with a specialist who can have a further discussion a little bit more about what's going on? So that has been great because it expedites callers to resources. It provides them with information and expertise and answers that maybe the helpline isn't able to because they don't have the expertise. It provides support in time of need. We know how difficult it is for someone to pick up the phone for the first time. And it can be a little, deflating when you finally make that call and maybe it's Friday and it's like, oh yeah, well, you could call Recovery Resources on Monday morning, right? When they open back up. This can really give someone support in that time of need when they're ready to talk about it and they want a little bit, they want more support. It decreases barriers to treatment. What we have found is the rapport that these clinicians provide through this warm transfer line really makes the comfort in going to treatment. It breaks down some of those barriers that maybe they're unsure. I've never been to a treatment facility before. I don't know what to expect. I don't know what it'll be like. They can talk about that. Here's what you can expect. This is kind of how it's going to go. And it really breaks down those barriers. And what we've found is that individuals using the warm transfer line will actually say, can you be my clinician? Because I like you so much after this conversation. So we think that that's one of the biggest testaments to it and its success. And then, of course, all of this is for the caller, but this last one is for the workforce. These clinicians are constantly having conversations with individuals with problem gambling or gambling disorder. So it's crisping up their knowledge and their experience because they're always having these conversations. So it's strengthening our workforce as well. And then to that last piece is recovery. So we've talked about including prevention in all of these clinical things that we've had and how we're strengthening our clinical workforce. But recovery is a massive component to that. So every training we put on, just like the quote at the beginning of this section was, it better be pretty specific not to include everything. We have recovery speakers at all of our trainings, all of our conferences. We incorporate GA or Gamma-Non meetings at our conferences. We allow for story sharing. Individuals in recovery are on our boards. We have a problem gambling advisory board, which sets priorities for strategic planning in the state. We have individuals on recovery on that board. When there's big grants to review and award, there are often reviewers on those types of projects. And again, with peer recovery supporters, this strengthens our workforce as well. So we are trying to constantly have the entire continuum of care represented, but also not just representation, but be a crucial piece in what we're doing. So again, something pulled out of our trainings.
My earliest experience would have been at the age of 6 that I can recall. And at that time, my father, he was an illegal sports bettor. And he would often take me with him to the places that he would go, little pool halls and things like that.
So for the sake of time, we're going to go on, but this is Jeff Stewart, and he is the vice president of the board of directors for PGNO, and he just did a closing keynote at our conference a few weeks ago. He's been very engaged in media. He was incredibly engaged in the advocacy during the rule writing process for sports betting in Ohio. So his talks are usually about, yes, his story sharing and what's gone on, but about how to be involved and the importance of having folks in recovery or with lived experience be a part of the field, be a part of the professional field and the treatment workforce and the prevention workforce, because they have so much to add. So that's, he has a lot of pieces in our trainings, and that was just, again, just showing how we have that involvement. Moving on to industry collaboration when building a treatment workforce. Our operators and regulators have a lot to bring to the table. And of course, we have one on right now with us today. But again, having operators and regulators speak in our treatment trainings to lend itself to their role in promoting responsible gambling and what the programs are like, and voluntary exclusion programs. So Cory will talk about that a little bit later. Our fellowship program visits venues in Ohio. Our fellowship program this year is actually going to the Hollywood Casino in Columbus, Ohio on Monday. So they tour the venue, they talk with the compliance team, they learn about trainings that the staff go through to recognize and listen for problem gambling signs, how they have those conversations. And even for the ones who are comfortable, they will go to a practice table. So not on the main floor, but they'll sit at a slot machine, they'll sit at a blackjack table and learn the games a little bit and have discussions on things like cognitive distortions or what it must be like to be in front of these machines and winning money and why it might be hard to step away from them. So we really try to immerse them in this side of the field, because it's a big, it's a huge part of why then you have a client in front of you, right? Again, operators and regulators are on our boards, Problem Gambling Advisory Board. They're reviewing big proposals for projects and strategic planning. And again, we believe this strengthens our workforce. So here you have pictures of our property tours. So this is open to the field, but we also have our fellows go as well. And you can actually see Jess Stewart here. These are, I can just tell by the back of their heads, we have some preventionists here. We have some clinicians over here. This is our good friend, Ed Dick at the Cleveland Casino. Again, speaking about what signs are they looking for? How are they prepared to have conversations? And why I think this is so key is because if you form greater and closer relationships with your operators and regulators, you can get to that missing piece of that collaboration pie, right? That connection and empowerment to want to do better. And that, I think, is shown best in this example here of Ed Dick overhearing a patron at his venue with some suicide ideation. This was an individual who was mentioning things like, I can't go back home after losing this money. I said I wouldn't do this again, things like that. So he asked the patron to step away from the table, and they had a conversation, and he found out, he was able to look up, their player profile, and this individual was losing a lot of money at a more rapid pace. And they had a conversation, and Ed connected this caller to PGNO, and we got the caller directly that day to a warm transfer specialist. And throughout a conversation, this person agreed to, they weren't specifically ready for treatment, but what they did is they said, can you call me back in a week and check in on me? And so the warm transfer specialist did. And a week later, that individual was ready to receive more treatment resources and has since engaged in the treatment process. So when you can connect those pieces together, we can then do better, right? And get people the services they need by making those types of connections and having those services available. And then another shaded slide. This is our lunch portion of one of our trainings, where we have Cory from Casino Control Commission and his counterparts, Susan and Jimmy from our Ohio Lottery Commission, speak again about their role and what it is that they do. And I'm sure those conversations have changed from every training. But Cory, do you want to say a little bit about some of the conversations you have during our treatment trainings?
Yeah, I think it's just more about kind of breaking down, again, some of those silos. So I think when people hear Casino Control Commission, they think that we work in the casinos, or which we have gaming agents that do have 24-hour 7-day a week inside of the properties, but we oversee, we regulate, we ensure that the casinos are following the rules that are outlined by legislation, and we ensure that the casinos are following the rules that are outlined by the administrative code. And I'll kind of get into that a little bit in the next presentation, kind of the differences between the revised code and the administrative code. But nonetheless, I mean, we're part of a consortium, a collaborative effort between 3 state agencies. It's the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, the Ohio Casino Control Commission, and the Ohio Lottery Commission. We make up Ohio for Responsible Gambling. And so we don't just, the Casino Control Commission does oversee the 4 casinos. We oversee fantasy contests. We oversee sports gambling. We ensure that they're following the rules that are outlined. But we also ensure that we provide, we're that fiscal agent essentially for the state of Ohio to ensure that there are prevention services, adequate treatment services available. So we're involved in the strategic planning, not just as a member of the Problem Gambling Advisory Board, but as a member of Ohio for Responsible Gambling. And so I think it's just really breaking it down, and especially when I come from a prevention background. I worked for, the state affiliate in Ohio. And so, people kind of get weird, and they get nervous and think that we are an operator, and they, get uncomfortable a little bit. But, we are actually on the other side of the coin. We're ensuring proper protections are in place for individuals who will, inevitably experience harm related to gambling.
Thank you. So we have talked about building a treatment workforce through collaboration with boards and providers throughout the continuum of care, with prevention and recovery, with our operation and regulation partners in the industry. And lastly, we're going to touch on community partners. So here is a little graphic that I pulled together real quickly about some other organizations that I have worked with, and I know that Cory has worked with, and this isn't anywhere near representative, but what I wanted to show was a little bit of the diversity. Being a part of or sitting on coalitions for alcohol and other drugs, for suicide, can be really impactful to get those communities and those bodies who already have a reputation, who are already doing really good work in the community, to understand the connections between and impacts of gambling addiction. I know Cory has sat on the Montgomery County Prevention Coalition, which is in the Dayton area, and they now actually have a gaming and gambling subcommittee that is doing a lot of good work in the community. the Lake County Suicide Prevention Coalition I sat on to get that knowledge out that gambling disorder actually has the highest suicide attempt rate of any addiction. These two causes, or these two, issues that we all value are so interconnected. And how can we not talk about one without the other? The Cuyahoga Problem Gambling Coalition was the first coalition specific to problem gambling work in the state of Ohio, and I think possibly nationally. Another organization that I worked really close with, that, and again, how Cory's kind of saying, it might be weird to have operational regulation here. Why are we combining with things like the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center? But when we tap into these other organizations that have expertise, that have networks, we can do better work together. So one of the things that I'll mention in the next presentation about work with colleges all started with a collaboration with the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center, because the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center has an office on every campus of a college or university in the Cleveland area. And we were able to partner with them to talk holistically about things that students value, like mental health, like sexual safety, like gambling disorder. So when we start to think outside the box and collaborate and work with these other communities, we can really do great work together. Here's a few statewide campaigns that I know Cory's going to be mentioning more so in the next section. So for the sake of time, I'm going to kind of just introduce them and he can go deeper in. But we have a statewide campaign called Get Set Before You Bet. And that is what it is. It's a responsible gambling campaign to let people know the risks, know the warning signs, know the resources. So get set before you bet. That is being transitioned into a new kind of campaign or slogan called Pause Before You Play, which has more of a sports betting specificity to it. So sports betting is fast, or sports are fast. Gambling shouldn't be. Let's pause before we play. And Time Out Ohio is the new name or branded name of our state's voluntary exclusion program, which Cory will definitely mention, but this is the ability to exclude yourself from not only our brick and mortar venues, but exclude yourself from mobile sports betting and also exclude yourself from things like marketing or advertising. And we also have one called Change the Game, which focuses on youth and gaming. So any of you doing youth work, I really would implore you to check this out. It's just changethegameohio.org. It has a ton of phenomenal resources for youth gambling and also youth gaming. So I think wrapping up with just a few considerations and having some time before we transition into the prevention presentation is kind of what we talked about today. Building a gambling disorder treatment workforce through collaboration. And I think what it really comes down to is sustainability. All of our programming for building a workforce should, one, be intentional, right? It should have specific goals and objectives for each training. It shouldn't kind of be willy-nilly. It should be specific to who we're speaking to and really have intention behind it, right? Our treatment trainings, again, are 12 hours, and 6 to get you to that 30. We make sure that each content domain is inside of each training. So people not only get the amount of CEUs, but get the correct CEUs that they need, right? You should have a planful timeline. Make sure that you know when people are available. That's not only the right days, the right times, but having those offerings. So people can get a quick CEU and some good information from noon to 1, right, on a weekday. Maybe longer trainings are best on a Friday or something like that. So just be planful and know what your professionals want and need. Work within your capacity. Know what the limits are. And capacity is time, it's funding, it's collaborations. So working within your capacity. And if your capacity is small, that's fine, right? Sometimes less can be more. So work within what you have. And I think what we showed most in the continuum of care is our programs and our training should be adaptable, right? We should be able to include every professional. We should be able to include the community. And if they need to change, if they need to adapt, if they need to update, we should be able to do that. So thinking back to the fellowship program, starting to adapt it to have leadership, starting to have prevention. Hopefully one day we have recovery in there. Same with warm transfer. Being able to adapt these programmings, all of these things allow for sustainability. And that's how you can have your growth of your treatment workforce, and also trust the process, right? So Cory mentioned this, but Mike Rosen was one of the first people to go through training, and he received supervision, and he went through the fellowship program. Then he started to shadow trainers. So then he started facilitating our trainings, and now facilitates our fellowship program. And that's just one example. People, right, going through this cycle of training, supervision, wanting to get involved and speak at conferences and facilitate programs and put on trainings. So you really want to build that sustainability and that workforce to be ambassadors, and then allow that cycle for other people. And I think this photo really shows that. So this is a photo of 30 people at the National Conference on Problem Gambling in Boston this past July. And Ohio had the second most professionals from any state, behind Massachusetts, at that conference. Looking back to the previous in-person conference due to COVID, 2019 in Denver, Ohio actually had more professionals than Colorado did. The year before that, the national conference was in Cleveland, Ohio. And I think that represents, right, the sustainability. We don't want just to train people, give them a little knowledge around gambling, and then they move on. How do you really keep people interested and invested? And this picture is full of preventionists, treatment providers, government workers, operation and regulation. There's marketing people in here who work on those campaigns I showed you. So I think this is a proud picture to show, and kind of the culmination of how do you build a workforce, and then mostly keep them invested and bought in the work that they're doing. And all of these people are doing really great work. I'm going to turn it over to Cory for some final thoughts and open it up for some thoughts or questions from our group. So thank you for letting us share a little bit about what we do in terms of workforce development in Ohio.
Yeah, I just want to again acknowledge the riches that we're spoiled with in Ohio. Obviously, 2% of the casino tax revenue does equal out to be around $6 million. And so being able to utilize those funds in providing these trainings and these services to professionals in Ohio, who then can provide services to those who are in need, is very big. And so again, just acknowledging that, but also, kind of imploring utilizing the resources that you may have, and utilizing the relationships that you have to, continue to do this work, and build up, your own systems inside of your state. So happy to take any questions.
Encounter for individuals starting to develop or at risk of developing problem gambling issues. And I wanted to take a moment to ask, what are the options for helping address or make people more aware of the issues related to smartphones, NFTs, crypto, and stuff like that, that's leading to more emerging issues with problem gambling in our younger populations?
Well, I'll say prevention is something that we're certainly going to cover next. And I think that's really the place to start, especially as we look at young people. Again, we have the Change the Game Ohio campaign. I think it's one thing that can be utilized with our young people, because it really doesn't just focus on youth gambling, but it also focuses on those gambling mechanics that are inside of young people's video games that they play, inside of social media. As a field, I think we really have to understand that gambling is so much bigger than casinos or historical horse racing venues or racetracks or bingo halls. Gambling has now expanded to our phones and black market stock market and all these other things. And so it kind of becomes one of those things is like, where do we draw the line? But it's difficult because it merges so well, because somebody could end up just day trading, and next thing you know, I mean, they're showing the same signs, warning signs as somebody who might have a problem with gambling. So Mike, other thoughts?
I think it goes back to something that I heard when I started getting into the field of prevention, and when I started on this career path, was a mentor always told me that whenever she was speaking with schools or other things like that, was let's add the G to AOD, right? We always talk about alcohol and other drugs in schools, high schools, colleges. Why are we not adding the G to AOD? It should be AODG, right? These things go hand in hand. We know our data shows that the more people engage in substances, they gamble more. And the more and more they gamble, they engage in substances more. They do go hand in hand, and you see them marketed together. And you see them in TV and movies together. So if we are talking about, alcohol and other drugs, we should be talking about gambling right in line with that. And that goes, I think, with anything, any risk behavior. And it is becoming so much more accessible to youth, and they're so much more aware than probably any of us in this room in how to access gambling and the gambling that goes on inside of gaming. So I would say, like, that would be my pitch of and if any of you have connections with schools, or you do work in schools where a lot of prevention programming takes place, start to be that ambassador of saying, let's add the G, because we know that these young people are engaging in this behavior as well.